clear that the negatives proposal is better than the affirmatives plan for 3 reasons. The affirmative plan will not work to improve conditions for anyone but those who already hold power and wealth. There is no advantage to implementing the affirmatives plan, while the negatives proposal allows the United States to save money and maintain its prosperity. And finally, free trade has been proven to advance overall economic, political, and social well-being. There is no way that the affirmative plan will create better standards for labor around the world. We cannot make all countries capitulate. Even if one country does not implement the affirmative team's protectionist measures, the affirmatives plan will not work. Because meeting the affirmative's labor standards will be expensive, businesses will move to the countries that don't implement these standards. Though this means that these businesses will not have access to American markets, they will still be trading with the rest of the world. The jobs these businesses take with them will be the jobs that the unskilled, low-wage labor force needed. Once these jobs leave, the poor will just get poorer. Furthermore, countries won't implement the plan, and the United States pressure will become an empty threat. If even one country were to not accept the affirmatives proposal, businesses would move there to make a profit to prevent the expenses of a minimum wage and the other regulations. Other nations would see that it is profitable to not give in to the affirmatives proposal and would forego the labor standards in order to draw business into their country. Eventually, all countries would see that it is better to not capitulate to the higher standards. The United States would either have no trading partners or would appear weak in giving up their demands for higher labor standards. We cannot afford to look weak. The affirmatives proposal would also not work because there is no way to enforce it. It would take too many of a poor nation's scarce resources to ensure that businesses did not cheat. The United States does not have the resources, the power, or the desire to monitor the labor conditions in every country. Robert Haenel, an economist at American University, argues that the United States often uses trade barriers to further the corrupt demands of its leaders. He states, "It is predictable that more often than not, the policy would be applied in an extremely hypocritical and counterproductive way. The pressure would be applied to governments deemed hostile to the U.S. investment and to governments that stood up to the United States bullion. The pressure would not be applied to compliant regimes, no matter how abusive." In short, the affirmatives plan will not work because economic and political leaders will find a way to cheat and benefit only themselves. The negatives proposal, on the other hand, allows countries to seek such economic advancement. As my partner has stated, free trade allows for innovation. Benjamin Friedman, a professor of economics at Harvard, shows how a free trade market leads to both economic and political advancement. He cites China as an example of free trade success. Since China's free trade reforms in 1978, the Chinese standard of living has increased 5-fold, and Friedman concludes that China will soon experience significant social and political liberalization. Furthermore, free trade encourages cooperation among countries, while protectionist measures foster ill will and violence among nations. For many years, prominent economists have argued that countries that trade will be less likely to go to war with one another. Nations that share markets will lose customers and income by declaring war, while a country that is blocked by trade barriers has nothing to lose from engaging in such hostilities. The affirmative team gave 2 examples of how trade pressures have worked in the past. The first example the affirmative team uses is Japan. However, the trade agreements reached with the auto manufacturers in Japan ended up hurting the corresponding United States producers. One needs only to point out the failings of the U.S. auto manufacturers to see that these trade barriers led to inefficient business and failure. The second example the affirmative gives is China. However, the United States demanded that the yuan be free-floating, and China only partially reevaluated their currency. Furthermore, the AF gives no example of when trade pressures have worked to improve working conditions or poverty within any country because no such example exists. There is another important aspect of the affirmatives plan that they are conveniently forgetting to discuss. What will this plan cost the American people? The affirmative claims that illegal immigration is too costly and must therefore be stopped. However, a recent article in The Economist pointed out that even at the highest estimate, illegal immigration costs the United States the same amount as protectionist measures taken by the government to help American businesses. If we increase our trade barriers, the amount we must spend to maintain these tariffs will increase as well. This is money that could be spent improving our schools, expanding medical insurance, or helping those who are truly poor here in the United States and abroad. The affirmative team cannot solve for the illegal immigration either. Better labor conditions are obviously not the reasons workers immigrate. People move to where the money is. A poor Mexican worker is not going to be enticed to stay in Mexico by a few more pesos when they could travel to the United States and increase their wages tenfold. Furthermore, the claims that the affirmative team makes against our proposals are ridiculous and just plain wrong. The affirmative team claims that the United States was an economic superpower in the 19th century, and therefore many of the reforms that took place regarding American labor cannot take place in other nations. However, the affirmative team needs to get their history straight. The United States did not really emerge as an economic superpower until the 20th century. Labor reform occurred alongside economic expansion in the United States. This proves Benjamin Freeman's argument that free trade encourages social and political liberalization. The affirmative plan is therefore unnecessary. The affirmative claims that better labor standards equal more money for countries. However, if it were as easy as the affirmative made it out to be, why would poor labor conditions exist in the world? The study that the affirmative cites does not even support their plan. Bivens and Weller's studies looked at labor standards that already exist and conclude that government regulations of working conditions largely have no effect on how companies operate. The point is that free trade works. The greatest example of the power of free trade is that of Europe and Japan after World War II. Businesses move to places with relatively low costs to themselves. As the economy improves, workers gain more rights and powers. Businesses may move on to another poor country, but the cycle repeats itself. By throwing up trade barriers, we would only be shooting ourselves in the foot. Businesses and political leaders would find ways around the reform. The economy's productivity and market capacity would drop, hurting the world's poor that the affirmative is so generously trying to save. Illegal immigration would continue. Immigrants would continue being abused and having no legal recourse, and the U.S. government would continue spending millions on illegal immigration. Will there be people who escape the advantages of free trade? Yes. Poverty will always be present in our perfect world. We must look to the solution that has been proven to exist. The question is simple. Do we continue with an economic system that has consistently been proven to work, or do we adopt the affirmative plan and implement a protectionist economy which has no proof of ever working and no chance it ever will?